Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. In today's session, we're going to look at our desire for our loved ones to come towards the Dhamma, to value the Dhamma, and realize the benefit of the Buddha's teachings. When we ourselves come towards the Dhamma, what happens is we start to taste the sweetness of the Buddha's teachings. We start to value them when we temporarily see that the Buddha's medicine actually works. When we follow the Buddha's instructions and what he says would happen in meditation, it happens. And over time, when we continue to practice, we develop path and fruit, and we really start to see the truth behind the Buddha's teachings, that stream entry is very important, that you remove any of the risks or dangers of being reborn into lower realms and you develop further. When someone directly sees that for themselves, the main thing that someone wishes to do, and it's a very wholesome intention, is for all their loved ones to come and do the same. If you can help anyone to enter the stream, then it becomes a yearning, a wanting. This is particularly true when you associate with good people. You see that all our Kalyana have this same wish, this same desire, this same attachment. May all my loved ones be free from the lower realms. May all my loved ones not be in any danger. May they remove suffering. And that becomes something that is paramount in one's practice. It's a very wholesome thing, because when you see the benefit yourself, so you've practiced and you see the benefit for yourself, you see the benefit of being generous, you see the benefit of keeping the precepts, you see the benefit of undertaking the development process, so the bhavana, the meditation. You really take delight in Dhamma and you are actually on the Dhamma path, no longer on simply the worldly path. Then it becomes very apparent that you want to be of benefit to others as well, particularly your loved ones. But of course it's not so easy. So what happens is most people end up lamenting. They come around to teachers and friends in Dhamma and they say, I can't bring my family. My parents won't come, or my children won't come. My partner is not interested. And so it becomes this sore point. There's a lot of sorrow, there's a lot of concern. And we're going to look at that in this session today. There are many aspects we can look at, and mostly what we will look at in this session is not to pass judgment on our loved ones, but to look at it from how the Buddha sees it, and to look at it in what we can do and how not to create more obstructions and difficulties for our loved ones. So the first thing to really look at is this functional and dysfunctional aspect to the desire for our loved ones to value Dhamma. So the functional side is we extend invitations. We don't exclude them, we include them. In terms of ourselves, we may be very enthusiastic towards Dhamma, but people in our family or our friends or colleagues or whoever it is that we want to help, they're not interested, or they're mildly interested. It's a bit of a sliding scale. But one of the things that is important is to have the metta qualities. One of the ones that comes to mind is politeness. So when we talk about what's functional, it's functional to be polite, courteous. So apagabbo is the politeness or courteousness. Pagabbo is when you are impolite or discourteous. If you invite someone, that's a very good thing. If they refuse to come or they're not interested, then you accept that in good spirit. And one of the things is you continue to invite, but in a very measured, detached way. It's when you start to want to drag people, pull people, push them into things that it becomes impolite. It can be quite damaging when you pull someone and they're not ready. That's one of the key things. That someone may not be ready, but sometime later they may be. Often we talk about the breaks, the messengers that the Buddha talks about. So when the Buddha, as Prince Siddhartha, what he saw was old age, sickness and death. That's the same thing that works for everybody else. Usually it's when something like that is seen that one starts to look for an answer to why are we aging? Why is there sickness, terminal sickness? Why is this happening to me or my loved ones? And of course, death is also one of the heavenly messengers. Usually that's the time that it's very, very painful. There's devastation and despair when there's a death, particularly a very close member of the family, someone that you are very attached to. It is at that point there may be an opening. And so it's important to remember that the timing may be such that the person is not ready. And the practice that we must all bear in mind is to have metta. So one of these things is to really look at functional and dysfunctional behavior. And you can see on this particular slide, there is politeness in inviting, warmly welcoming someone to join you when you go for a Dhamma session or when you are going to listen to a talk. But the dysfunctional side is when you're dragging someone, kicking and screaming, or someone who is very angry and doesn't want to be there. So that is not helpful for the person. If you're thinking about, is this of benefit to the person? If they are extremely uncomfortable, they really don't want to be there, then it's not good to drag them, not good to force them. And there's a number of reasons for that, and we'll look at that. Now we look at our loved ones. This is really about where they are at. And one of the things is they may be difficult to instruct. So if you remember the Anumana Sutta, what does the Buddha say? There are 16 different qualities. So when they are very, very high in a particular person, it may mean that they are actually not ready to come towards Dhamma. So the Buddha talks about evil wishes and being dominated by evil wishes. So this is being very negligent, doing more in the world, not wanting to come to Dhamma. So they don't have virtue, they're not interested in learning about virtue. Of course, when you have wrong view, it is like that. They may also glorify themselves and have a lot of contempt for others. This is the Atukansaka Paravambi. And also they get very angry. The 4 different ways that the Buddha talks about, that they allow it to overcome them, they get resentful, they're quite stubborn around it, and then they say things out of anger. So you know that this person is not ready yet. And also when you give them feedback, there are these 5 different ways that they would talk back, they would resist, they would denigrate in response, they would counter-reprove someone, they would prevaricate and basically be like a brick wall, and they won't account for their conduct. So these are the different examples that you see when someone may not be ready and they're very difficult to instruct. So even if you bring them, they're telling you off in their mind. The brick wall is up, they're not listening, they're there physically, but mentally they're not open to receive any medicine from the Buddha. And then you have these defilements which are very much like the Vatupama Sutta. There is Makka, derogation, palasa, disparaging. When the conditions are set, they have envy and stinginess. There's also fraud and deceit or hypocrisy. The person is obstinate or stubborn and arrogant. And so they're not willing to let go of whatever views they have. So they may have very strong views about the way things are in the world. They may value politics over Dhamma. They may value science over the Buddha Dhamma. They may have very strong views about the Buddha that are not favorable. And so they won't let them go. They're not willing to listen. When that is the case, then you need to wait and see. This is not easy for such a person to come and listen to the Buddha's words, no matter who is teaching. And so this is something just to bear in mind. When someone is difficult to instruct, it's difficult to bring them to Dhamma. And so that person would struggle to understand the Dhamma. They may not be ready yet. Another aspect that is very helpful to understanding why it's difficult for people to come towards the Dhamma, whether they are loved ones or not, is because of this understanding of the world versus understanding of the Buddha's Noble Path. So if you remember, we looked at the Khattiya Sutta. This was in Anguttara Nikaya chapter 6, discourse number 52. On this particular slide, we're looking at 3 different classes or groups. The first is the ruling class, the second is householders, and the third is ascetics or samanas. The questions that this Brahmin asked the Buddha were around the wishes, the quest, the determination and the inclination, and the final goal of these groups of people. So what's interesting for us is as you listen to the Buddha's answer, you get this glimpse of why people are not so concerned about Buddha Dhamma. They don't see the urgency, they don't understand the value of Buddha Dhamma. Instead, they value other things. So the Buddha's answer in the case of the ruling class is, wealth is the wish of the ruling class. Their quest is for wisdom. Power is their determination. They are inclined towards territory or land, and their final goal is supremacy. So when you think about it this way, with the ruling class, these are the people that rule our countries, the world. They are part of the government, so politicians, kings, queens, military, people that support the ruling class. Their priority is basically around resources, assets, land, holding on to power, having domination or supremacy. So their entire focus is on that, and they would fight wars in order to gain more land and resources or defend the territory that they have to maintain the power that they have. And then when it comes to householders, what the Buddha's answer to the Brahmin was, wealth is the wish of householders, their quest is for wisdom. So that bit is similar to the ruling class. But then it says their skill is their determination. So skill can be profession or expertise or experience. And they are inclined towards work, so the job or the business. And their final goal is to complete their work. So for most people, you would understand when someone declines or refuses an invitation to come to a Dhamma event or something like that, they may say, I've got too much work on. And essentially they're saying that they're prioritizing their work because that's what they value. Normally what we prioritize is what we value. If they're not doing that, then they're studying or improving themselves, doing some sort of development in order to improve their skill, their profession. So professional accreditations and training and all those sorts of things, because work is the priority. Now, it's not their fault for that. Our world, our society is conditioned by work. That is the thing that everyone is encouraged to do. Unless you leave the world and become a monk or a nun or someone that has that kind of place in society. If you are a householder, the way people talk to each other is, what do you do? What is your job? What is your skill? What is your profession? And so that's where that is coming from. If you, for example, out of understanding of Dhamma, that you want to repay the debt to your parents and you want your parents to come towards Dhamma, to enter the stream, and the Buddha says that that's the way to repay the debt to parents, but you find that your parents are not wanting to come and they're retired, the reason is because all their lives they have been striving with this determination, with this wish, with this quest, with this inclination. And they've completed the final goal of finishing their job if they've retired. But in some ways, when you listen to them talk, they may still talk about their jobs a lot. They may still talk about the place that they had in society, because it's very strong. If you spend most of your life doing that, then that's how you identify yourself. And so until you come to Dhamma and see the value of Dhamma, you will still hold on to that for a very long time. For someone who's wanting to help their parents out of a very noble intention to repay the debt, you keep persisting, but you understand this aspect of it. It can be helpful. Now, when it comes to our children, again, if we continually prioritize studies without any balance towards Buddha Dhamma, then of course children are not going to want to come towards Dhamma. They don't see the value of it unless you've explicitly explained it to them. In Buddhist societies, what is really good about the culture is actually going to Sunday school, being able to participate in certain things. Now, quite often young people, they don't really understand some of these aspects. They think it's purely cultural. But there is a lot of meaning behind pujas and making offerings and dana and all those kinds of things, even to learn meditation. And not simply the modern way of thinking that it will just simply calm the mind. It's actually a lot more than that. But unless we convey it to our children and our loved ones, then they don't grow up understanding the value of it. So if you still have the chance to convey that, it's good to have that open dialogue to make them understand, not just through studying, but through other means, that that's how you live a fuller life, balanced with the right view. If you purely encourage study, work, getting married, then those are the things that you will find that they will value. They think that their only place in the world is to gain, is to covet, is to toil in the world for wealth and prestige through their skill and profession, through what they do with their work. But if you never convey to them the importance of Buddha Dhamma, then what you will find is they won't be inclined in that way because you haven't given that example. And one of the things to bear in mind is it's never too late, even as a Kalyana Mitta to the people that we care about. Sometimes we get very embedded in our roles, and that's what also prevents them from coming towards the Buddha Dhamma for whatever reason. Roles have this inherent way of having authority or some other block. But if we approach our loved ones as Kalyana Mitta, as people who are our spiritual friends, sometimes we might have a better chance. And so these are a couple of aspects to remember. The other part is, what is the wish, quest, determination, inclination, and final goal of a samana? With respect to samanas or ascetics, the Buddha's answer is patience and gentleness is the wish of ascetics. Their quest is for wisdom. Their virtuous conduct is their determination. They are inclined towards nothingness, and their final goal is nibbana. So that's quite a contrast to the ruling class and householders, but it gives you an understanding that it is a different path. There is right view behind the samana or ascetic's wishes, quest, determination, and inclination. We can't expect our loved ones to understand that, but it's important to be able to see some of the blocks that come up for our loved ones is very much around worldly matters, worldly priorities, and therefore taking that on board, you look at ways and means to help them out to actually see the value of Buddha Dhamma, but not in a sense that is pushy, but through right understanding. Part of the Buddha's Noble Path is about renunciation, that is part of right intention. But it's not easy for someone who is very caught up in the world, wanting to gain from the world, wanting to be seen as successful in the world, being measured by the worldly yardstick. The Buddha's yardstick is very much going the other way. It is going against the stream. It is about giving, giving up, renunciation, and then ultimately relinquishment. So when you think about the world, you see that the world is about gain, about stinginess, about not giving up, about acquiring more. At that level, you see the dukkha in that as well. More and more and more. When is it ever enough? There is immense suffering at that level. But that is something that maybe our loved ones cannot see at this juncture. So it's good to be measured in how we help them out. Another aspect when it comes to our loved ones is to ensure that they don't sabotage themselves by abusing and insulting those accomplished in view. So there's a sutta where the Buddha talks about different teachers who were accomplished in view, and you see this in the Jatakas as well as the suttas. And they have different names like Muggapaka, Hathipala, Jotipala. Some of them were actually the Buddha when he was the Bodhisattva. These teachers at the time had many, many disciples, and the teachers were rid of sensual desire, and they could teach their students to be reborn into the Brahma realms. And those students who had confidence in their teacher were reborn into the Brahma realms, but those who were lacking in confidence in those teachers, they actually went to the lower realms. And what the Buddha was asking was, if someone with malicious intent were to abuse and insult those particular teachers with their followers, would they make bad karma? And the answer is yes, they would. Someone who abuses and insults a single person accomplished in view with malicious intent makes even more bad karma. Why is that? And the Buddha says, I say that any injury done by those outside of the Buddhist community does not compare with what is done to one's own spiritual companions. So you should train like this. We will not have malicious intent for those who we want to have as our spiritual companions. This is how you train. So clearly there is a couple of things here. The first one is to ensure that our loved ones, particularly if they're not in Dhamma, not to insult anyone, not to insult the Buddha, not to insult anyone who is accomplished in view. because they make unwholesome karma, bad karma. And if they are loved ones who are our spiritual companions, we don't want to enter into conversations where they would do so. And this is natural to happen when we talk about teachers, when we talk about different practices. Sometimes it's better to have the stop sign, not to enter into that, not to have an opinion or a strong opinion about these things, because this is how you sabotage one's own path and you sabotage others. And so if you want to be a help to loved ones, is to refrain from certain things and to ensure you don't place them in a position when they're not ready and they end up insulting someone. Now, not always does someone have malicious intent, but there's still unwholesome karma when you tell someone off in your mind, particularly someone accomplished in view. The other side to this is talking about insulters of noble ones. So the Tevijja Sutta, this is Itivuttaka number 99, the Buddha says, "Then again, bhikkhus, with the divine eye purified and surpassing a human, a bhikkhu sees before passing away and reappearing inferior and superior, fair and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate, and he understands how beings pass on according to their deeds thus. Those worthy beings practicing misconduct by body, speech and mind, insulters of the noble ones, of wrong view, and undertaking deeds in consequence of wrong view, when the body perishes, have been reborn after death in a state of misery, a bad born, a state of ruin, hell." So it's very important that we don't insult the noble ones. And that goes with our loved ones as well. We don't create opportunities for them to insult noble ones. Sometimes that example is really when we drag loved ones to an event or to a talk or to a retreat and they really don't want to be there. In their mind, they end up insulting noble ones. They may insult the Buddha in the mind. They may say something to someone on a retreat who has path and fruit. They don't even realize that that person has path and fruit, and they insult them, disrespect them, dishonor them. This is an important thing to recognize, that we don't want to sabotage the path of our loved ones. It may be that it's not in this lifetime that they can come towards Dhamma. What needs to be encouraged is, rather than pulling them towards Dhamma, is to encourage them to be generous. And eventually, once they're generous, encourage them to be virtuous. If you remember from the gradual instructions of the Buddha, Anathapindika, the Buddha talks about Dana Kata first, then Sila Kata, then Sagga Kata, and then about sensual pleasures, the danger and the obstruction and the defilement of sensual pleasures, then about renunciation, and then the Four Noble Truths. So there is a method to the way that the Buddha teaches. If it's very clear that our loved ones are not ready, encourage generosity. Once you encourage generosity and that certain things are starting to change for them, encourage virtue. But it's very important not to insult the noble ones. Usually what is the antidote to that is to ask for forgiveness, to bow and ask for forgiveness of the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha 3 times, and have a strong determination not to do it again. Now, when we come to why we want our loved ones to come towards the Dhamma, it's a very wholesome thing. But at the same time, it may be overly concerned, and it may also be that we are on the dysfunctional side. So the sutta that really helps is the Haladakani Sutta. So we did a whole session on why it's difficult to renunciate the world. And this very much resonates. And it also resonates with metta a lot. If you remember with metta, loving kindness, one of the aspects is that we don't yearn or hanker for families and groups. Otherwise our metta is solely directed to only the people we like, only the people that we care for. But the Buddha talks about immeasurable metta, where it is boundless, immeasurable to all living beings. So when you look at the Haladakani Sutta, there's 2 insight pathways. Venerable Mahakachana looks at explaining the Buddha's teaching. He talks about intimacy in the village, not being rid of sensual desires, entertaining expectations, and engaging people in dispute. And this is a very interesting way of looking at this desire for our loved ones to come to the Dhamma. It is because of this intimacy in the village, in our families, in our community, When they go through difficulties, we also feel like we go through difficulties. When they're doing well, we also feel like we're doing well. When there is issues within their groups and their families, we also develop a lot of intimacy in knowing the ins and outs of that and wanting to help out. The problem with that is the people that we are intimate with, they become our sensual pleasure, where we are too interested, wanting to know. And so we are always asking and pandering into all those things, whatever is going up and down in their lives. And that is a very worldly thing. When that happens, we entertain expectations. So when you're intimate in the village and you have this deep desire for someone to come towards the Dhamma, that is one's attachment. There is tanha there is craving. You take delight, express it, and remain holding. So when you try and drag someone towards the Dhamma, there's very much that craving that is being established. And so you entertain expectations. I want my son, my daughter, my husband, my wife to come towards the Dhamma. When that happens and you have this expectation, they must come with me. You know that it is of benefit. However, they don't. And so where does it end up? You see, it ends up engaging people in dispute. This is not a good thing, to be in dispute with people over Buddha Dhamma. This is something that would turn people off. It becomes that there is non-metta being practiced. And if you get into dispute, then there is ill will, there is all these kinds of things. We'll go into that a little deeper as well. But it's just interesting to look at this application of the Haladikani Sutta when Venerable Mahakachana explains this. You could simply put the example in when you really yearn for your loved ones to come to Dhamma. It is out of this intimacy in the village that you haven't rid of that desire. It is actually your friends and family and group is part of the sensual desire. And so when that happens, you have this expectation that they should come to Dhamma. They will come to Dhamma. It's important that in the future they do. And so there's a longing there. When that's there, then you engage in dispute, because when there's a longing, you start to develop, knowingly or unknowingly, ill will. And so that's how you get into dispute. You start to fight. Why won't you come? You must come. It's so important for you. And so on and so forth. Now, when Venerable Mahakachana explains it, he explains it in a larger sense, in the bigger predicament, that we do things with our family and friends in a very attached manner. We entertain expectations of doing that again in the future, enjoying sensual pleasures together in the future, and then, of course, you get into disputes. The opposite of that, the antidote, is really less intimacy in the village. When you follow the Buddha's path, it's actually no intimacy. If you remember from the Sukha Somanassa Sutta, instead of intimacy, what the Buddha encourages is solitude, paviveka. And this is more helpful towards the Dhamma path, because you know at some point in the future, one has to leave all the loved ones. One is separated from all that is beloved. And so the encouragement is never to be so strongly attached. When you do that, then it is possible to be rid of sensual pleasures, because you see the danger in sensual pleasures. When that is the case, there are no expectations. When you are without expectations, you don't engage people in dispute. So one of the things that is very evident is when there is discord in the family around Dhamma, it is because people have expectations. So you can look at this in many, many ways, to look at it moving forwards and moving backwards in the insight pathway. If you are engaged in dispute within your family or with friends over Dhamma, why is that? It's because one has expectations. They must come to Dhamma. They should come to Dhamma. It's of value to them, but they don't see that. So you're not rid of the craving for them to do so. So this can be used as a wisdom practice. When you look at it this way, you actually see detachment is really important. Each person is the owner of their karma, heir to their karma. So whatever they do, they will be the heir. Now, because we are intimate in the village, we have too much craving, therefore we are too up in someone else's business. To a certain extent, one always justifies, that's my son, that's my daughter, that's my partner, that's my loved one. But the Buddha and Venerable Mahakachana in the Haladikani Sutta is really telling us otherwise. What we don't see is the best way to help our loved ones is to be that good example. The good example, the one that practices metta, means that we don't yearn for family and groups. We don't prefer them. And that's a very difficult one to see when we have so much desire for our loved ones to come to Dhamma. It's not easy, is really the truth. Because when you really taste the sweetness of the Dhamma, when you yourself have entered the stream, you understand what the safety means in stream entry. You want that for all the people that you care about. It's not a bad intention, it's a very wholesome one. But if that person does not have that wholesome intention or wish themselves, then it can be difficult. And so you don't really want to engage in dispute with people over Dhamma. And you don't want to sabotage their path in any way by fighting with them over it. And at the same time, you also want to have genuine metta towards them. And you can't have that if you have ill will to your loved ones for not coming towards Dhamma. You can't have metta if you are bearing a grudge against them because they may have said something about your practice. You can't have that towards them if you are impolite, dragging them to Dhamma events. They don't see the metta, they don't experience it from you. To be of benefit to others is really to encourage but not force. To be gentle, not harsh. To be non-judgmental rather than judgmental. And allow things to take its course. For them to see genuine happiness in your practice. Where they eventually come and say, how did that work for you? Why do you not shake when the conditions are difficult? Why is it possible for you to be happy when everybody else is miserable? How do you remain calm when it's so stressful and challenging? And that's when your opening comes, that they genuinely want to know, and you genuinely have an answer for that. What is also important to recognize is too much care and concern for others, too much involvement in the affairs of others, is actually akusala, unwholesome, unskillful. So if you remember from the Vitakka Sutta, the Buddha says that one of the three kinds of unwholesome thoughts is this thought concerned with the involvement in the affairs of others. Para anudaya patisamyutto. This is where we're too interested, too concerned. It errs from the functional side to the dysfunctional side. Functional means that we do whatever we can that is easeful, that is necessary, that is practical. But when we encroach on another person's ability to make their own decisions, their ability to tell you what they really want, then that is when we're pestering someone, being impolite, maybe too much in their business. Sometimes it takes a little while to really recognize that it is akusala. And so the meditation in this instance would be, what does the Buddha really mean about too much care and concern and involvement in the affair of others? Why does he say that it is unwholesome? And to really meditate on that, ask that question and sit there. So you bring up your own examples of when someone is all up in your business and wanting to force you to do things. Too nosy, too pestering, too domineering. And then you ask yourself, what is that like? What is it like to be on the receiving end of that? And what is it like when someone comes to you lamenting about other people? The answer is often when there's too much lamentation, parideva, too much of that in the mind. Is that wholesome or unwholesome? It's very unwholesome. There are many ways of looking at it, but it's quite important to see that it is unskillful and unwholesome. In this case, sometimes we feel, oh, but we're trying to be of benefit to others. But if the Buddha is clearly saying that it is unwholesome, then we are not being of benefit to others. We are worrying, we are restless, we are having ill will towards others. Because we may have the expectation they must come to Dhamma, they must do it right now. But maybe it is not possible for them. Oftentimes people don't have enough punya yet. What is easier is to encourage people, your loved ones, to make more merit and to help people out where they ask for help. Sometimes what people ask for is not Dhamma. Sometimes what they ask for is just peace of mind. And so if you can offer peace of mind in mundane things, if you can just help them out in different ways. Sometimes what they need is a meal, or they need a kind word, or they need someone just to listen to them and to stay calm. Sometimes the answer is not dragging them to Dhamma, because until they feel the safety of non-judgment, the safety of kindness, the safety of generosity, then they can't enter the Dhamma. Let's now look at the 4 nutriments in order to understand the pathway that we go when we have too much care and concern and it becomes unskillful, particularly around wanting our loved ones to come to Dhamma. So the 4 nutriments in the sense of the unprofitable directions. We end up going the bad ways or the wrong ways. So we take our loved ones as the physical nutriment. We make contact. So these are our loved ones. We want them to come to Dhamma. The problem is that when we get to the clinging to virtue and observances, we are already having this craving. We take delight, express it, remain holding. Where does this lead to? It leads to the body tie of ill will, because there is an expectation gap. When they don't come towards Dhamma, which is what we want them to do, we think, out of compassion, let's pull them towards Dhamma. But they're not interested, or they're not ready yet, or they're half-hearted, or they're confused, and there's an expectation gap. So what we expected was that they would be very thankful, they would be very happy, but what we find is it's not that. It's somewhere in between. It's worse than that. They're really not liking you for doing it. So in our own minds, what happens is there's this expectation gap. What we thought was going to make us happy, that harmoniously we would all come to Dhamma, and that's not the case. When you get into this mindset, you start to get the aversion and the resistance. Why isn't my loved one interested in this way? Why isn't my loved one seeing the value of the Dhamma, understanding the importance of the Dhamma, seeing the danger if that they don't come towards the Buddha's teaching, they may be going to lower realms? But we ourselves are very attached at this point. We suffer a lot. When we suffer, instead of this sukha, we're experiencing dukkha, the feeling or the experience of it. It's also because when you look at this, we attach to me and mine. Those are my loved ones. These are the person I care about. So this is where it's coming from. You make contact with your loved ones at the physical nutriment. You go down this contact as nutriment. Where does it end up? Because the post-perception of it is always, this is me and mine. You end up in going the wrong way through hate. Dosa agati. Because you're steadying on the feeling and you're unhappy because they're not complying. They're not seeing the value of Dhamma. And so you go the wrong way through hate, despite thinking you're doing something compassionate. And so there's this interweaving thing that when you have very strong expectations about what someone should be doing, then you end up going the wrong way with hate. Because when you don't get what you want, the only outcome is really ill will and then hate. And so what's in the mind is actually a very unwholesome state of mind. This is one way of looking at it. And to really protect yourself from doing that, it creates a lot of disputes in the family because of it, or disputes with friends and colleagues or people that you're trying to bring towards Dhamma. And to really look at that, because there's not much you can do about another person, but there is very much you can correct your view and to safeguard from going the wrong way through hate. What becomes really important then, when you start to see the unwholesome nature associated with yearning for our loved ones to come to the Dhamma, is to cleanse the mind of defilements, these mental stains, the greed, hatred and delusion that are at the root of these defilements. If there is ill will towards loved ones because they are not interested in Dhamma, then you cleanse the mind of any ill will you have towards them. You cleanse your mind of the wanting for them to come when they're not ready. Because what happens is that the mind becomes clean. It can easily concentrate. It starts to let go of aversion. And in that way, what's really helpful is to see one's own practice. It's very important at any point in time not to have defilements in the mind, not to harness them, not to breed them, to really live by the Dhamma. The metta insight pathway that is in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, it's actually a very good one to practice with when we have this acknowledgement of this longing for our loved ones to come to Dhamma. It's because it sets the mind with right view and sets our conduct to have these skilled states through body, speech and mind. If you look at upright, thoroughly upright, there is something very, very important in being virtuous. When we are easy to instruct, that means the defilements such as stinginess, derogation, disparaging, envy, they're also not there. The stinginess towards our families or groups, kulamacharya, it gets abandoned at that stage. So we're not having even preferences towards our families, our friends, our colleagues. Being gentle is very important. Sometimes when we have intense longing, we can be quite harsh. You remember that gentleness is linked to courteousness, and we can be quite impolite in our demands where we think we are being compassionate. And so you really look at it when you examine this metta bhavana. And so when it comes to being humble, not arrogant, controlled in the senses, these are things that if we put into practice are very good when it comes to not disturbing others, not even being conceited around Dhamma. And then we make wiser choices about these things. And of course the politeness is very important. Politeness, there are three aspects: the bodily politeness, verbal politeness and mental politeness. There's something in each of the three to examine when it comes to wanting our loved ones to come to Dhamma. And where you get to is not yearning for families or groups. And so when you let go of this attachment to specific families or groups, you're able to wish everyone, all living beings, to be happy and safe. And you start to really remove the unhappiness you might have with your loved ones who are not complying. Then metta is really there. If you see that yearning for families and groups to come to Dhamma is like an open wound, you heal that wound by understanding with wisdom not to take them as me and mine, to genuinely not to take them as me and mine. It's a very high practice, but in the meditation it is possible. If you meditate in that way, gradually you chip away at this intense wanting for them to come to Dhamma. Each person is the owner of their own karma, heir to their karma, whatever karma they do. So it's important to really see that and to not veer off the path by behaving in a non-metta way. So in many ways this is a very good example of how you come away from metta due to attachment to families and groups. You do not pass grade 9. In fact, if you really are honest with this, you maybe don't even pass grade 3 because there is stinginess towards families and groups. Me and my family must come to Dhamma, me and my family this or that. So it's very important to really look at this. It's actually a very high practice to practice patience, particularly with loved ones who are not interested in Dhamma, who can't see the value of it yet. And when they say patience is a virtue, it really is, because many of us end up waiting years, many years, for our loved ones to eventually want to know and want to learn Dhamma. And when they do, the important thing is not to be rude with them, to say, finally, you've come, or it took you long enough. That is not the thing to do. It's actually to be inwardly happy that when someone eventually turns towards Dhamma, someone you care about, you're inwardly happy for them, with mudita, with joy. And at that point, also, you don't sabotage them, you don't bombard them with things. You just give them what they ask for. So if they say, do you have a talk on loving kindness that you could share with me? You share that, but you don't bombard them. Patience means you gauge what is appropriate. You don't domineer, you don't be harsh with them, you don't judge them. When the wisdom faculty is there, there is more detachment, there's more equanimity. when you don't take it as me and mine, you can be of more service to others. And so this is another way of looking. Patience is very important. It can serve very well in helping others, and it takes time. There are examples in the suttas of certain lay disciples of the Buddha wanting their loved ones to come towards the Dhamma. One particular example that we've actually looked at before is the son of Anathapindika, and it's the story of Kala. This is in Dhammapada verse number 178. So there's a separate talk on this. If you remember this story, Anathapindika bribed his son with money in order for him to go and listen to the Buddha, to go and spend time in the monastery. And initially, the first time he tried to bribe his son, it didn't really work. He came home early and he didn't really listen to the Dhamma. The second time, he offered more money and made a requirement for him to memorize a verse from the Buddha. So Kala went to the Buddha and got the verse from the Buddha, and using his powers, the Buddha made it so that Kala couldn't easily memorize the verse. So Kala ended up having to repeat the verse over and over again well into the night until the morning he actually managed to memorize it. But essentially, through his good fortune, he eventually memorized it and penetrated the meaning of that verse. And so he realized the fruit of stream entry. And when he was accompanying the Buddha and the monks back to his own house, he realized that he felt shameful for having to be bribed with money in order to come towards the Dhamma. Anathapindika, out of desire and love for his son, didn't want his son to be reborn into lower realms. And he had a great fear for that, because his son wasn't particularly interested in Dhamma. Never really wanted to be around when Buddha and the monks would come for alms round to their home. And so you see, even in the suttas, even despite everything that's been said in this talk, that there are circumstances and different means that are used in order to entice people. So take that for what you will. But sometimes when the opportunity is there, and don't forget, this is Kala approaching the Buddha. And so the Buddha has, special powers and knowledges, but it's a very endearing story. One of the interesting things to accompany that is the verse that the Buddha utters to Anathapindika. What he says is, sole sovereignty over the earth, or going to a heavenly place, or domination over the entire world, the fruit of stream entry is superior. So that's very important for us to remember. When we earlier looked at the Kathiya Sutta and the wish, the quest, the determination, the inclination and the final goal of the ruling class and householders, you see that when you prioritize the world, when you prioritize gaining wealth or being the best at your profession and having the best job, that is nothing compared to what the Buddha says is the fruit of stream entry. And beyond this world, going to a heavenly place, the Buddha says stream entry is still superior, domination over the entire world. So if you are the king or queen of this world, that is still not as superior as the fruit of stream entry. So there's something very, very profound in what the Buddha is emphasizing to us and continues to emphasize throughout other teachings. We can end our session here. Let's share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Wishing you all well. Peruan Saranai.